They kidnapped the judge's son, but this police canine dog changed everything. When 10-year-old Liam Hayes is abducted by a ruthless gang to silence his father, a forgotten police canine named Brutus becomes his only hope. Wounded and abandoned, the old dog has survived years in the wild, but his instincts have never dulled. As Liam fights to escape, Brutus stands between him and the relentless criminals, facing deadly traps, betrayals, and a final showdown in the forest. Just when all seems lost, sirens wail in the distance, but will rescue arrive in time? Or will Brutus have to make the ultimate sacrifice? Liam Hayes felt the cold bite into his skin as he sat on the rough wooden floor of the cabin. The room smelled of damp wood and something metallic, like old nails left to rust. His hands were bound, and his legs ached from staying still too long. Outside, the wind rattled through the trees, the only sound breaking the heavy silence inside. He had no idea how long he had been here. Maybe hours. Maybe longer. The last thing he remembered was walking home from school, the weight of his backpack pulling at his shoulders. Then the screech of tires, the sharp sting of something pressing against his arm, and the world had gone black. Now, he was trapped, and no one knew where to find him. Through a small gap in the boarded-up window, Liam spotted two men standing outside. One of them, stocky with a scar across his cheek, was talking in a low voice to the taller one, Morgan Voss. Liam had heard the name before. His father had mentioned him once while discussing a case. Liam strained to hear. "Judge Hayes thinks he can fight this," Morgan said. His voice was steady, almost bored. "But it doesn't matter. Even if he drops the case, the kid doesn't leave here alive." Liam's breath hitched. He pressed himself against the wooden wall, willing his heart to slow down. If they had meant to use him as a bargaining chip, that plan was gone now. There was no rescue coming. He had to get out on his own. Liam scanned the room for anything useful. The chair in the corner was missing a leg, the nails rusted but still sharp. The door had a simple lock, nothing too complicated. He shifted his wrists, testing the ropes. They weren't tight enough to cut off circulation, but they held firm. He twisted his fingers, reaching for the edge of the broken chair leg. The wood scraped against his skin as he worked the nail loose. Outside, footsteps crunched against the dirt. Liam froze as the door creaked open. Morgan stepped inside, his shadow falling over Liam. "Hungry?" he asked, holding out a piece of bread. Liam said nothing. He wouldn't beg. Wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Morgan shrugged and tossed the bread onto the floor before walking back out. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place. Liam grabbed the nail and started sawing at the rope. His hands burned, his fingers raw, but he kept going. Voices drifted in from outside. "We move him tomorrow." "Where?" "Doesn't matter. After that, we're done." Liam's stomach turned. He didn't have until tomorrow. He needed to go now. The rope snapped free. His arms ached as he rubbed at his wrists. He crawled toward the door, pressing his ear against the rough wood. The voices outside had faded. He reached for the lock, fingers working carefully, heart hammering as he lifted the latch. A soft click. He pushed the door open an inch, just enough to see outside. Morgan stood near the trees, lighting a cigarette. The other man was farther away, checking a truck parked near the clearing. This was his chance. Liam slipped outside, keeping low. The cold air stung his face. He moved toward the trees, each step careful, measured. The dry leaves crunched underfoot, and he held his breath, waiting. No one turned. He kept going, slipping deeper into the woods. Then a shout. "Where's the kid?" Liam ran. The branches whipped against his face, but he didn't stop. Heavy boots thudded behind him, getting closer. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Then, suddenly, the ground disappeared. He tumbled forward, rolling down a steep hill. Rocks cut into his arms, dirt filled his mouth, and then, splash. Icy water closed around him. The river's current yanked him under. He kicked, breaking through the surface, gasping for air. The water pulled him forward, faster, away from the cabin, away from Morgan, away from the men who wanted him gone. His arms burned as he struggled to stay afloat. The river twisted sharply, slamming him into a half-submerged log. He grabbed hold, coughing, his lungs aching. The sound of shouting drifted through the trees. The gang was still searching. They had lost sight of him, but it wouldn't take them long to figure out where the river led. He had to move. Liam pulled himself onto the muddy riverbank, his body shivering from the cold. He stumbled toward the trees, his legs weak, but he kept going. The forest stretched ahead, thick and endless. He didn't know where he was, only that he had to keep moving. A snap of twigs nearby made him freeze. He turned, expecting one of the men, but it wasn't a dog. Large, scarred, its coat rough and patchy, the animal stood a few feet away, watching him. Its ears twitched, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Liam's pulse raced. Was it dangerous? Would it attack? But then, the dog took a slow step forward. Not aggressive. Cautious. Its eyes locked on his, measuring him. His legs gave out, and he collapsed near a stream, his body too exhausted to fight anymore. The dog didn't leave. It circled him, sniffing the air, its stance protective. Then, a whistle. Voices. Footsteps crunching through the undergrowth. The gang was getting closer. Liam gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move, but his limbs refused. The dog, Brutus, suddenly let out a low growl. His ears flattened, his body tense. He recognized the danger before Liam even saw it. A figure stepped into view. One of the gang members. A thick knife gleamed in his hand. "There you are, kid." Brutus moved first. His growl turned into a snarl as he lunged, sinking his teeth into the man's arm. The thug howled, dropping the knife. Brutus didn't let go, his body twisting as he pulled the attacker to the ground. The man kicked wildly, trying to shake him off, but the old dog held firm. Liam scrambled backward, his breath coming fast. He had never seen anything like this. Brutus wasn't just any dog. He was a fighter. The thug finally managed to kick Brutus off and stumbled back, gripping his bleeding arm. He took one look at the dog, at the way it stood between him and Liam, teeth bared, and made his decision. He ran. Brutus didn't chase. He stood his ground, his body tense, his eyes locked on the retreating figure until he was gone. Then, Brutus turned to Liam. He panted, tilting his head as if waiting. Liam understood. They had to go. He pushed himself up, still shaking, and followed Brutus deeper into the trees. Brutus led Liam through the dense forest, moving carefully to avoid leaving tracks. He guided Liam through a shallow stream to mask their scent. But Morgan Voss was no fool. He found traces of movement. "They have a dog with them," Voss muttered, annoyed but intrigued. "Fine. We'll deal with it." Liam, barely keeping up, collapsed near an old fallen tree. Brutus stayed alert, sniffing the air. He knew they were being followed. Then, a rustle in the bushes. Brutus reacted instantly. He pushed Liam down and growled, teeth bared. A second thug appeared, raising a metal pipe. Brutus lunged without hesitation. Brutus tackled the thug before he could swing. The pipe hit the ground as the man yelled in pain, struggling under the weight of the old dog. Brutus clamped his jaws down, forcing the attacker to roll onto his side, his face twisted in panic. Liam scrambled to his feet, grabbing a thick branch from the forest floor. He swung hard, hitting the thug across the back. The man groaned, writhing beneath Brutus's weight. "Go!" Liam shouted, yanking at Brutus's collar. The dog hesitated, eyes locked on the enemy, then let go and followed Liam deeper into the trees. They ran until their legs refused to carry them any farther. Ahead, an old cabin stood hidden among thick underbrush. The door creaked open, and a man with a weathered face and a long beard stepped onto the porch. "You look like hell, kid," he muttered, motioning them inside. Liam hesitated, glancing at Brutus. The dog stood still, staring at the man. His fur bristled. Something was wrong. Liam took a cautious step forward. Inside, a radio crackled with static. His eyes darted to the man's wrist. A tattoo. The same symbol he had seen on Morgan Voss's men. His stomach dropped. The man shut the door behind them. "Nothing personal, kid," he said, voice low. "They're paying me good money to keep you here." Brutus growled deep in his throat. Then, crash. The old dog lunged, knocking the man to the floor. The radio clattered off the table. The man cursed, reaching for a pistol strapped to his belt. Liam reacted without thinking. He grabbed the radio and hurled it at the man's head. The device shattered, pieces scattering across the floor. Otis roared, shoving Brutus back. The dog stumbled but recovered, baring his teeth. Liam spotted the open door. "Brutus, let's go." Brutus released Otis and bolted after Liam. They sprinted through the trees as the old man scrambled to his feet. Behind them, Otis's voice crackled over a second radio. "They're getting away. Voss, get here now." Liam didn't look back. He focused on the uneven path ahead, branches cutting into his skin as he pushed forward. Brutus ran beside him, his breath heavy, his movements sharp despite his age. In the distance, an engine roared to life. The gang was closing in. Liam spotted a rocky slope leading down to a valley. If they made it down before the gang reached them, they might have a chance. Brutus barked, as if urging him on. Liam took a deep breath and jumped. His feet hit the rocky slope hard, and he rolled, arms flailing as he slid down. Brutus followed, his paws kicking up dust and loose gravel. The slope leveled out into a valley thick with trees, and Liam hit the ground running. Behind them, the sound of engines roared to life. The gang was coming. Brutus, despite his limp, pushed forward, leading Liam through the trees. They crossed a shallow river, the cold water shocking against Liam's skin. Brutus splashed ahead, stopping briefly to make sure Liam followed. The river would mask their scent, but only for so long. They reached a dense thicket. Brutus halted suddenly, sniffing the ground. Liam nearly tripped over him. He looked down and saw wires stretched across the ground, barely visible in the moonlight. A trap! Liam swallowed hard. He stepped carefully around it, Brutus watching him closely. If the dog hadn't stopped him, he would have walked right into it. A buzzing sound filled the air. Liam ducked as a drone zipped overhead, scanning the trees. He pressed himself into the undergrowth, holding his breath. Brutus lay low beside him, completely still. The drone hovered for a moment, then drifted away. They needed to move. Up ahead, an old ranger station stood among the trees. The roof sagged, and the windows were broken, but it was shelter. Liam ran inside, pressing his back against the wall. Brutus stood at the entrance, his ears up, his body tense. Headlights flared in the distance. Voss had arrived. The truck skidded to a stop. Doors slammed. Footsteps crunched against the forest floor. Brutus let out a low growl. "Come on out, kid," Voss called. "You gave us a good run, but it's over." Liam clenched his fists. No, it wasn't over. Not yet. Voss's men moved closer. Brutus crouched, ready to fight. Liam looked around for anything he could use. His eyes landed on an old flare gun hanging on the wall. Grabbing it, he loaded a flare and aimed at the truck's hood. He pulled the trigger. A bright flash erupted as the flare struck, igniting the engine in a burst of fire. The men shouted, stumbling backward. Then, sirens wailed. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. More vehicles tore down the dirt road, skidding to a halt. The doors flew open, and officers poured out, guns drawn. "Freeze!" Judge Hayes stepped out from one of the cars, his face set with fury. His eyes locked onto Liam, and for the first time in days, relief washed over him. The gang scattered into the woods, but it was too late. Officers tackled them to the ground one by one. Voss, eyes burning with rage, stood still, fists clenched. He met Liam's gaze, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Liam fell to his knees, exhaustion crashing over him. Brutus pressed against him, breathing hard but alive. It was finally over. Judge Hayes ran forward, dropping to his knees beside Liam. He wrapped an arm around him, holding him tight. Liam gripped his father's jacket, his breath uneven as relief settled into his bones. Brutus sat close, his body tired, but his eyes never leaving the tree line. Even as the gang was hauled into the back of police vehicles, the old dog remained alert, ready for anything. Judge Hayes knelt beside Liam and rested a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Liam nodded, glancing at Brutus. "He saved my life." Hayes turned his attention to the wounded dog, his gaze softening. Brutus's coat was matted with dirt, his body marked with fresh scrapes and bruises. Despite it all, he stood firm, his head high. "Does he have a home?" Hayes asked. Liam didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around Brutus's thick neck. "He does now." Brutus licked Liam's face, letting out a tired huff before sitting beside him. It was done. They had survived.